Vietnam was full of strange stories, some improbable, some well beyond that. But the stories that will last forever are those that swirl back and forth across the border between trivia and bedlam, the mad and the mundane. This one keeps returning to me. I heard it from Rat Kiley, who swore up and down to its truth, although in the end I'll admit that doesn't amount to much of a warranty. Among the men in Alpha Company, Rat had a reputation for exaggeration and overstatement, a compulsion to rev up the facts, and for most of us it was normal procedure to discount 60 or 70% of anything he had to say. If Rat told you, for example, that he'd slept with 4 girls one night, you could figure it was about a girl and a half. It wasn't a question of deceit, just the opposite. He wanted to heat up the truth, to make it burn so hot that you would feel exactly what he felt. For Rat Kiley, I think, facts were formed by sensation, not the other way around. And when you listen to one of his stories, you'd find yourself performing rapid calculations in your head, subtracting superlatives, figuring the square root of an absolute, and then multiplying by maybe. Still, with this particular story, Rat never backed down. He claimed to have witnessed the incident with his own eyes, and I remember how upset he became one morning when Mitchell Sanders challenged him on its basic premise. "It can't happen," Sanders said. "Nobody ships his honey over to Nam. It don't ring true. I mean, you just can't import your own personal poontang." Rat shook his head. "I saw it, man. I was right there. This guy did it. His girlfriend? Straight on. It's a fact." Rat's voice squeaked a little. He paused and looked at his hands. "Listen, the guy sends her the money, flies her over, this cute blonde, just a kid, just barely out of high school. She shows up with a suitcase and one of those plastic cosmetic bags. Comes right out to the boonies. I swear, man, she's got on culottes. White culottes and the sexy pink sweater. There she is." I remember Mitchell Sanders folding his arms. He looked over at me for a second, not quite grinning, not saying a word, but I could read the amusement in his eyes. Rat saw it too. "No lie," he muttered. "Culottes." When he first arrived in country before joining Alpha Company, Rat had been assigned to a small medical detachment up in the mountains west of Chu Lai, near the village of Bong, where along with 8 other enlisted men he ran an aid station that provided basic emergency and trauma care. Casualties were flown in by helicopter, stabilized, then shipped out to hospitals in Chu Lai or Da Nang. It was gory work, Rat said, but predictable. Amputations mostly, legs and feet. The area was heavily mined, thick with bouncing betties and homemade booby traps. For a medic, though, it was ideal duty, and Rat counted himself lucky. There was plenty of cold beer, 3 hot meals a day, a tin roof over his head, no humping at all. No officers either. You could let your hair grow, he said, and you didn't have to polish your boots or snap off salutes or put up with the usual rear echelon nonsense. The highest-ranking NCO was an E6 named Eddie Diamond, whose pleasures ran from dope to Darwin, and except for a rare field inspection, there was no such thing as military discipline. As Rat described it, the compound was situated at the top of a flat-crested hill along the northern outskirts of Bong. At one end was a small dirt helipad. At the other end, in a rough semicircle, the mess hall and medical hooches overlooked a river called the Song Bong. Surrounding the place were tangled rolls of concertina wire, with bunkers and reinforced firing positions at staggered intervals, and base security was provided by a mixed unit of RFs, PFs, and ARVN infantry, which is to say virtually no security at all. As soldiers, the RAVNs were useless. The rough and puffs were outright dangerous, and yet even with decent troops, the place was clearly indefensible. To the north and west, the country rose up in thick walls of wilderness. Triple canopied jungle, mountains unfolding into higher mountains, ravines and gorges and fast-moving rivers and waterfalls and exotic butterflies and steep cliffs and smoky little hamlets and great valleys of bamboo and elephant grass. Originally, in the early 1960s, the place had been set up as a special forces outpost. And when Rat Kiley arrived nearly a decade later, a squad of 6 Green Berets still used the compound as a base of operations. The Greenies were not social animals. Animals, Rat said, but far from social. They had their own hooch at the edge of the perimeter, fortified with sandbags and a metal fence, and except for the bare essentials, they avoided contact with the medical detachment. Secretive and suspicious, loners by nature, the 6 greenies would sometimes vanish for days at a time, or even weeks. Then, late in the night, they would just as magically reappear, moving like shadows through the moonlight, filling in silently from the dense rainforest off to the west. Among the medics, there were jokes about this, but no one asked questions. While the outpost was isolated and vulnerable, Rat said, he always felt a curious sense of safety there. Nothing much ever happened. The place was never mortared, never taken under fire, and the war seemed to be somewhere far away. On occasion, when casualties came in, there were quick spurts of activity, but otherwise the days flowed by without incident, a smooth and peaceful time. Most mornings were spent on the volleyball court. In the heat of midday, the men would head for the shade, lazing away the long afternoons, and after sundown there were movies and card games and sometimes all-night drinking sessions. It was during one of those late nights that Eddie Diamond first brought up the tantalizing possibility. It was an offhand comment. A joke, really. What they should do, Eddie said, was pool some bucks and bring in a few mamasons from Saigon, spice things up, and after a moment, one of the men laughed and said, "Our own little EM club," and somebody else said, "Hey, yeah, we pay our fucking dues, don't we?" It was nothing serious, just passing time, playing with the possibilities, and so for a while they tossed the idea around. How you could actually get away with it. No officers or anything, nobody to clamp down. Then they dropped the subject and moved on to cars and baseball. Later in the night, though, a young medic named Mark Fossey kept coming back to the subject. "Look, if you think about it," he said, "it's not that crazy. You could actually do it." "Do what?" Rat said. "You know, bring in a girl, I mean. What's the problem?" Rat shrugged. "Nothing. A war." "Well, see, that's the thing," Mark Fossey said. "No war here. You could really do it. A pair of solid brass balls, that's all you need." There was some laughter, and Eddie Diamond told him he'd best strap down his dick, but Fossey just frowned and looked at the ceiling for a while, and then went off to write a letter. 6 weeks later, his girlfriend showed up. The way Rat told it, she came in by helicopter, along with the daily resupply shipment out of Chulai, a tall, big-boned blonde. At best, Rat said, she was 17 years old, fresh out of Cleveland Heights Senior High. She had long white legs and blue eyes and a complexion like strawberry ice cream. Very friendly, too. At the helipad that morning, Mark Fossey grinned and put his arm around her and said, "Guys, this is Marianne." The girl seemed tired and somewhat lost, but she smiled. There was a heavy silence. Eddie Diamond, the ranking NCO, made a small motion with his hand, and some of the others murmured a word or two. Then they watched Mark Fossey pick up her suitcase and lead her by the arm down to the hooches. For a long while, the men were quiet. "That fucker," somebody finally said. At evening chow, Mark Foss explained how he'd set it up. Expensive, he admitted, and the logistics were complicated, but it wasn't like going to the moon. Cleveland to Los Angeles, LA to Bangkok, Bangkok to Saigon. She'd hop to C-130 up to Chulai and stayed overnight at the USO, and the next morning hooked a ride west with the resupply chopper. "A cinch," Fossey said, and gazed down at his pretty girlfriend. "Thing is, you just gotta want it enough." Marianne Bell and Mark Fossey had been sweethearts since grammar school. From the 6th grade on, they had known for a fact that someday they would be married and live in a fine gingerbread house near Lake Erie, and have 3 healthy yellow-haired children, and grow old together and no doubt die in each other's arms and be buried in the same walnut casket. That was the plan. They were very much in love, full of dreams, and in the ordinary flow of their lives, the whole scenario might well have come true. On that first night, they set up house in one of the bunkers along the perimeter, near the Special Forces hooch, and over the next 2 weeks they stuck together like a pair of high school steadies. Almost disgusting, Rat said, the way they mooned over each other, always holding hands, always laughing over some private joke. All they needed, he said, were a couple of matching sweaters. But among the medics, there was some envy. This was Vietnam, after all, and Marianne Bell was an attractive girl. Too wide in the shoulders, maybe, but she had terrific legs, a bubbly personality, a happy smile. The men genuinely liked her. Out on the volleyball court, she wore cut-off blue jeans and a black swimsuit top, which the guys appreciated, and in the evening she liked to dance to music from Rat's portable tape deck. There was a novelty to it. She was good for morale. At times she gave off a kind of come-get-me energy, coy and flirtatious, but apparently it never bothered Mark Fosse. In fact, he seemed to enjoy it, just grinning at her, because he was so much in love, and because it was the sort of show that a girl will sometimes put on for her boyfriend's entertainment and education. Though she was young, Rat said, Marianne Bell was no timid child. She was curious about things. During her first days in country, she liked to roam around the compound asking questions. What exactly was a trip flare? How did a claymore work? What was behind those scary green mountains to the west? Then she'd squat and listen carefully while somebody filled her in. She had a good, quick mind. She paid attention. Often, especially during the hot afternoon, she would spend time with the ARVNs out along the perimeter, picking up little phrases of Vietnamese, learning how to cook rice over a can of sterno, how to eat with her hands. The guys sometimes liked to kid her about it. Our own little native, they'd say. But Marianne would just smile and stick out her tongue. I'm here, she'd say. I might as well learn something. The war intrigued her. The land, too, and the mystery. At the beginning of her second week, she began pestering Mark Fosse to take her down to the village at the foot of the hill. In a quiet voice, very patiently, he tried to tell her that it was a bad idea, way too dangerous. But Marianne kept after him. She wanted to get a feel for how people lived, what the smells and customs were. It did not impress her that the VC owned the place. Listen, it can't be that bad, she said. They're human beings, aren't they, like everybody else? Fosse nodded. He loved her. And so in the morning, Rat Kiley and two other medics tagged along as security, while Mark and Marianne strolled through the ville like a pair of tourists. If the girl was nervous, she didn't show it. She seemed comfortable and entirely at home. The hostile atmosphere did not seem to register. All morning, Marianne chattered away about how quaint the place was, as she loved the thatched roofs and naked children, the wonderful simplicity of village life. A strange thing to watch, Rat said. This 17-year-old doll in her damn culottes, perky and fresh face like a cheerleader visiting the opposing team's locker room. Her pretty blue eyes seemed to glow. She couldn't get enough of it. On their way back to the compound, she stopped for a swim in the Song Bong, stripping down to her underwear, showing off her legs while Fosse tried to explain to her about things like ambushes and snipers and the stopping power of an AK-47. The guys, though, were impressed. A real tiger, said Eddie Diamond. D-cup guts, trainer bra brains. She'll learn, somebody said. Eddie Diamond gave a solemn nod. There's a scary part. I promise you this girl will most definitely learn. In parts, at least, it was a funny story. And yet to hear Rat Kiley tell it, you'd almost think it was intended as straight tragedy. He never smiled, not even at the crazy stuff. There was always a dark, far-off look in his eyes, a kind of sadness, as if he were troubled by something sliding beneath the story's surface. Whenever we laughed, I remember, he'd sigh and wait it out. But the one thing he could not tolerate was disbelief. He'd get edgy if someone questioned one of the details. She wasn't dumb, he'd snap. I never said that. Young, that's all I said. Like you and me, a girl, that's the only difference. And I'll tell you something, it didn't amount to jack. I mean, when we first got here, all of us, we were real young and innocent. Full of romantic bullshit, but we learned pretty damn quickly, and so did Marianne. Rat would peer down at his hands, silent and thoughtful. After a moment, his voice would flatten out. You don't believe it? He'd say. Fine with me, but you don't know human nature. You don't know Nam. Then he'd tell us to listen up. A good, sharp mind, Rat said. True, she could be silly sometimes, but she picked up on things fast. At the end of the second week, when 4 casualties came in, Marianne wasn't afraid to get her hands bloody. At times, in fact, she seemed fascinated by it. Not the gore so much, but the adrenaline buzz that went with the job. That quick, hot rush in your veins when the chopper settled down and you had to do things fast. In Rat, no time for sorting through options, no thinking at all. You just stuck your hands in and started plugging up holes. She was quiet and steady. She didn't back off from the ugly cases. Over the next day or two, as more casualties trickled in, she learned how to clip an artery and pump up a plastic splint and shoot in morphine. In times of action, her face took on a sudden new composure. Almost serene, the fuzzy blue eyes narrowing into a tight, intelligent focus. Mark Fosse would grin at this. He was proud, yes, but also amazed. A different person, it seemed, and he wasn't sure what to make of it. Other things, too. The way she quickly fell into the habits of the bush. No cosmetics, no fingernail filing. She stopped wearing jewelry, cut her hair short, and wrapped it in a dark green bandana. Hygiene became a matter of small consequence. In her second week, Eddie Diamond taught her how to disassemble an M16, how the various parts worked, and from there it was a natural progression to learning how to use the weapon. For hours at a time, she plunked away at sea ration cans. A bit unsure of herself, but as it turned out, she had a real knack for it. There was a new confidence in her voice, a new authority in the way she carried herself. In many ways, she remained naive and immature, still a kid, but Cleveland Heights now seemed very far away. Once or twice, gently, Mark Fossey suggested that it might be time to think about heading home. But Marianne laughed and told him to forget it. "Everything I want," she said, "is right here." She stroked his arm, and then kissed him. On one level, things remained the same between them. They slept together, they held hands, and made plans for after the war. But now there was a new imprecision in the way Marianne expressed her thoughts on certain subjects. Not necessarily 3 kids, she'd say. Not necessarily a house on Lake Erie. "Naturally, we'll still get married," she'd tell him. "But it doesn't have to be right away. Maybe travel first. Maybe live together. Just test it out, you know?" Mark Fossey would nod at this, even smile and agree. But it made him uncomfortable. He couldn't pin it down. Her body seemed foreign somehow, too stiff in places, too firm where the softness used to be. The bubbliness was gone, the nervous giggling too. When she laughed, which was rare, it was only when something struck her as truly funny. Her voice seemed to recognize itself at a lower pitch. In the evenings, while the men played cards, she would sometimes fall into long, elastic silences, her eyes fixed on the dark, her arms folded, her foot tapping out a coded message against the floor. When Fossey asked about it one evening, Marianne looked at him for a long moment and then shrugged. "It's nothing," she said. "Really nothing. To tell the truth, I've never been happier my whole life. Never." Twice, though, she came in late at night, very late, and then finally, she did not come in at all. Rat Kiley heard about it from Fossey himself. Before dawn one morning, the kid shook him awake. He was in bad shape. His voice seemed hollow and stuffed up, nasal sounding, as if he had a bad cold. He held a flashlight in his hand, clicking it on and off. "Marianne," he whispered. "I can't find her." Rat sat up and rubbed his face. Even in the dim light, it was clear that the boy was in trouble. There were dark smudges under his eyes, the frayed edges of somebody who hadn't slept in a while. "Gone," Fossey said. "Rat, listen, she's sleeping with somebody. Last night she didn't even... I don't know what to do." Abruptly then, Fossey seemed to collapse. He squatted down, rocking on his heels, still clutching the flashlight, just 18 years old. Tall and blonde, a boy, a gifted athlete, a nice kid too, polite and good-hearted. Although for the moment none of it seemed to be serving him well. He kept clicking the flashlight on and off. "All right, start at the start," Rat said. "Nice and slow. Sleeping with who?" "I don't know who. Eddie Diamond." "Eddie? Has to be. The guy's always there, always hanging on her." Rat shook his head. "Man, I don't know. Can't say it strikes a right note. Not with Eddie." "Yes, but he's..." "Easy does it," Rat said. He reached out and tapped the boy's shoulder. "Why not just check some bunks? We got 9 guys, you and me, that's 2, so there's 7 possibilities. Do a quick body count." Fossey hesitated. "But I can't. If she's there, I mean, if she's with somebody." "Oh..." Rat pushed himself up. He took the flashlight, muttered something, and moved down to the far end of the hooch. For privacy, the men had rigged up curtained walls around their cots, small makeshift bedrooms, and in the dark, Rat went quickly from room to room, using the flashlight to pluck out the faces. Eddie Diamond slept a hard, deep sleep, the others too. To be sure, though, Rat checked once more, very carefully, then he reported back to Fossey. "All accounted for, no extras. Eddie? Darwin dreams." Rat switched off the flashlight and tried to think it out. "Maybe she just, I don't know, maybe she camped out tonight, under the stars or something. You searched the compound?" "Sure I did." "Well, come on," Rat said. "One more time." Outside, a soft violet light was spreading out across the eastern hillsides. 2 or 3 ARVN soldiers had built their breakfast fires, but the place was mostly quiet and unmoving. They tried the helipad first. then the mess hall and supply hooches. Then they walked the entire 600 meters of perimeter. Okay, Rat finally said. We got a problem. When he first told the story, Rat stopped there and looked at Mitchell Sanders for a time. So, what's your vote? Where was she? The Greenies, Sanders said. Yeah? Sanders gave him a savvy little smirk. No other option. That stuff about the special forces, how they use the place as a base of operations, how they'd glide in and out. All that had to be in there for a reason. That's how stories work, man. Rat thought about it, then shrugged. All right, sure, the Greenies, but it's not what Fosse thought. She wasn't sleeping with any of them. At least not exactly. I mean, in a way she was sleeping with all of them, more or less, except it wasn't sex or anything. They was just lying together, so to speak. Marianne and these 6 grungy, weirded-out Green Berets. Lying down, Sanders said. You got it. Lying down how? Rat smiled. Ambush all night long, man. Marianne's out on a fucking ambush. Just after sunrise, Rat said, she came trooping in through the wire, tired-looking but cheerful, as she dropped her gear and gave Mark Fosse a brisk hug. The 6 Green Berets did not speak. One of them nodded at her, the others gave Fosse a long stare, then they filed off to their hooch at the edge of the compound. Please, she said, not a word. Fosse took a half step forward and hesitated. It was as though he had trouble recognizing her. She wore a bush hat and filthy green fatigues. She carried the standard M16 automatic assault rifle. Her face was black with charcoal. Marianne handed him the weapon. I'm exhausted, she said. We'll talk later. She glanced over at the Special Forces area, then turned and walked quickly across the compound toward her own bunker. Fosse stood still for a few seconds, a little dazed it seemed. After a moment, though, he set his jaw and went after her with a hard, fast stride. Not later, he yelled. Now! What happened between them, Rat said, nobody ever knew for sure. But in the mess hall that evening, it was clear that an accommodation had been reached. Or more likely, he said, it was a case of setting down some new rules. Marianne's hair was freshly shampooed. She wore a white blouse, a navy blue shirt, a pair of plain black flats. Over dinner, she kept her eyes down, poking at her food, subdued to the point of silence. Eddie Diamond and some of the others tried to nudge her into talking about the ambush. What was the feeling out there? What exactly did she see and hear? But the question seemed to give her trouble. Nervously, she'd look across the table at Fosse. She'd wait a moment as if to receive some sort of clearance. Then she'd bow her head and mumble out a vague word or two. There were no real answers. Mark Fosse, too, had little to say. Nobody's business, he told Rat that night. One thing for sure, there won't be any more ambushes, no more late nights. You laid down the law? Compromise, Fosse said. I'll put it this way, we're officially engaged. Rat nodded cautiously. Well, hey, she'll make a sweet bride, he said. Combat ready. Over the next several days, there was a strained, tightly wound quality to the way they treated each other, a rigid correctness that was enforced by repetitive acts of willpower. To look at them from a distance, Rat said, you would think they were the happiest 2 people on the planet. They spent the long afternoon sunbathing together, stretched out side by side on top of their bunker, or playing backgammon in the shade of a giant palm tree, or just sitting quietly. A model of togetherness, it seemed. And yet at close range their faces showed the tension. Too polite, too thoughtful. Mark Fosse tried hard to keep up a self-assured pose, as if nothing had ever come between them or ever could, but there was a fragility to it, something tentative and false. If Marianne happened to move a few steps away from him, even briefly, he'd tighten up and force himself not to watch her, but then a moment later, he'd be watching. In the presence of others, at least, they kept on their masks. Over meals, they talked about plans for a huge wedding in Cleveland Heights, a 2-day bash, lots of flowers, and yet even then their smiles seemed too intense. They were too quick with their banter. They held hands as if afraid to let go. It had to end, and eventually it did. Near the end of the 3rd week, Fosse began making arrangements to send her home. At first, Rat said, Marianne seemed to accept it, but then after a day or two she fell into a restless gloom, sitting off by herself at the compound's perimeter, shoulders hunched, her blue eyes opaque. She seemed to disappear inside herself. A couple of times Fosse approached her and tried to talk it out, but Marianne just stared out at the dark green mountains to the west. The wilderness seemed to draw her in. A haunted look, Rat said, partly terror, partly rapture. It was as if she had come up on the edge of something, as if she were caught in that no-man's land between Cleveland Heights and deep jungle. 17 years old, just a child, blonde and innocent. But then weren't they all? The next morning she was gone. The 6 greenies were gone too. In a way, Rat said, poor Fozzie expected it, or something like it, but that did not help much with the pain. The kid couldn't function. The grief took him by the throat and squeezed and would not let go. Lost, he kept whispering. It was nearly 3 weeks before she returned, but in a sense she never returned. Not entirely, not all of her. By chance, Rat said. He was awake to see it. A damp, misty night. He couldn't sleep, so he'd gone outside for a quick smoke. He was just standing there, he said, watching the moon, and then off to the west a column of silhouettes appeared as if by magic at the margin of the jungle. At first, he didn't recognize her. A small, soft shadow among 6 other shadows. There was no sound, no real substance either. The 7 silhouettes seemed to float across the surface of the earth like spirits, vaporous and unreal. As he watched, Rat said, it made him think of some freaky opium dream. The silhouettes moved without moving. Silently, one by one, they came up the hill, passed through the wire, and drifted in a loose field across the compound. It was then, Rat said, that he picked out Marianne's face. Her eyes seemed to shine in the dark. Not blue, though, but a bright, glowing jungle green. She did not pause at Fossey's bunker. She cradled her weapon and moved swiftly to the Special Forces hooch and followed the others inside. Briefly, a light came on, and someone laughed, and the place went dark again. Whenever he told the story, Rat had a tendency to stop now and then, interrupting the flow, inserting little clarifications or bits of analysis and personal opinion. It was a bad habit, Mitchell Sanders said, because all that matters is the raw material, the stuff itself, and you can't clear it up with your own half-baked commentary. That just breaks the spell. It destroys the magic. What you have to do, Sanders said, is trust your own story. Get the hell out of the way and let it tell itself. But Rat Collie couldn't help it. He wanted to bracket the full range of meaning. I know it sounds far out, he'd tell us, but it's not like impossible or anything. We all heard plenty of wackier stories. Some guy comes back from the bush, tells you he saw the Virgin Mary out there. She was riding a damn goose or something. Everybody buys it. Everybody smiles and asks, how fast was they going? Did she have spurs? Well, it's not like that. This Marianne wasn't no virgin, but at least she was real. I saw it. When she came in through the wire that night, I was right there. I saw those eyes of hers. I saw how she wasn't even the same person no more. What's so impossible about that? She was a girl, that's all I mean. If it was a guy, everybody'd say, hey, no big deal. He got caught up in the knob shed. He got seduced by the greenies. See what I mean? You got these blinders on about women. How gentle and peaceful they are. All that crap about how if we had a pussy for president, there wouldn't be no more wars. Pure garbage. You gotta get rid of that sexist attitude. Rat would go on like that until Mitchell Sanders couldn't tolerate it any longer. It offended his inner ear. The story, Sanders would say, the whole tone, man, you're wrecking it. Tone? The sound. You need to get a consistent sound, like slow or fast, funny or sad. All these digressions, they just screw up your story's sound. Stick to what happened. Frowning, Rat would close his eyes. Tone, he'd say, I didn't know it was all that complicated. The girl joined the zoo. One more animal. End of story. Yeah, fine, but tell it right. At daybreak the next morning, when Mark Fossey heard she was back, he stationed himself outside the fenced-off Special Forces area. All morning he waited for her, and all afternoon. Around dusk, Rat brought him something to eat. She has to come out, Fossey said. Sooner or later she has to. Or else what? Rat said. I'd go get her. I'd bring her out. Rat shook his head. Your decision. I was you, though. No way I'd mess around with any greenie types. Not for nothing. It's Marianne in there. Sure, I know that all the same, but I'd knock real extra super polite. Even with the cooling night at Fossey's face slick with sweat. He looked sick. His eyes were bloodshot. His skin had a whitish, colorless cast. For a few minutes, Rat waited with him, quietly watching the hooch. Then he patted the kid's shoulder and left him alone. It was after midnight when Rat and Eddie Diamond went out to check on him. The night had gone cold and steamy, a low fog sliding down from the mountains, and out in the dark there was music playing. Not loud but not soft either, it had a chaotic, almost unmusical sound without rhythm or form or progression, like the noise of nature, a synthesizer, maybe an electric organ. In the background, just audible, a woman's voice was half singing, half chanting, but the lyrics seemed to be in a foreign tongue. They found Fosse squatting near the gate in front of the Special Forces area. Head bowed, he was swaying to the music, his face wet and shiny. As Eddie bent down beside him, the kid looked up with eyes not quite in register, ashen and powdery. "Hear that?" he whispered. "You hear it's Marianne." Eddie Diamond shook his arm. "Let's get you inside somebody's radio, that's all it is. Move it now." "Marianne, just listen." "Sure, but listen!" Fosse suddenly pulled away, twisting sideways, and fell back against the gate. He lay there with his eyes closed. The music, the noise, whatever it was, came from the hooch beyond the fence. The place was dark except for a small glowing window, which stood partly open, the panes dancing in bright reds and yellows as though the glass were on fire. The chanting seemed louder now, fiercer too, and higher pitched. Fosse pushed himself up. He wavered for a moment and then forced the gate open. "That voice," he said, "Marianne." Rat took a step forward, reaching out for him, but Fosse was already moving fast toward the hooch. He stumbled once, caught himself, and struck the door hard with both arms. There was a noise, a short screeching sound, like a cat, and the door swung in, and Fosse was framed there for an instant. His arms stretched out, and then he slipped inside. After a moment, Rat and Eddie followed quietly. Just inside the door, they found Fosse bent down on one knee. He wasn't moving. Across the room, a dozen candles were burning on the floor near the open window. The place seemed to echo with a deep wilderness sound, tribal music, bamboo flutes and drums and chimes. But what hit you first, Rat said, was the smell. Two kinds of smells. There was a topmost scent of joss sticks and incense, like the fumes of some exotic smokehouse. But beneath the smoke lay a deeper and much more powerful stench. Impossible to describe, Rat said. It paralyzed your lungs, thick and numbing like an animal's den, a mix of blood and scorched hair, an excrement and the sweet sour odor of moldering flesh, the stink of the kill. But that wasn't all. On a post at the rear of the hooch was the decayed head of a large black leopard. Strips of yellow-brown skin dangled from the overhead rafters. And bones, stacks of bones, all kind. To one side, popped up against the wall, a wall stood a poster in neat black lettering. "Assemble your own gook, free sample kit." The images came in a swirl, Rat said. There was no way you could process it all. Off in the gloom, a few dim figures lounged in hammocks or on cots, but none of them moved or spoke. The background music came from a tape deck near the circle of candles, but the high voice was Marianne's. Mark Fosse started to get up, but then stiffened. "Marianne?" he said. Quietly, then, she stepped out of the shadows. At least for a moment, she seemed to be the same pretty young girl who had arrived a few weeks earlier. She was barefoot. She wore her pink sweater and a white blouse and a simple cotton skirt. For a long while, the girl gazed down at Fosse, almost blankly, and in the candlelight, her face had the composure of someone perfectly at peace with herself. It took a few seconds, Rat said, to appreciate the full change. In part, it was her eyes, utterly flat and indifferent. There was no emotion in her stare, no sense of the person behind it. But the grotesque part, he said, was her jewelry. At the girl's throat was a necklace of human tongues, elongated and narrow, like pieces of blackened leather. The tongues were threaded along a length of copper wire. One tongue overlapping the next, the tips curled upwards, as if caught in a final shrill syllable. Just for a moment, the girl looked at Mark Fosse with something close to contempt. "There's no sense talking," she said. "I know what you think, but it's not bad." "Bad?" Fosse murmured. "It's not." In the shadows there was laughter. One of the greenies sat up and lighted a cigar. The others lay silent. "You're in a place," Marianne said softly, "where you don't belong." She moved her hand in a gesture that encompassed not just the hooch, but everything around it. The entire war, the mountains, the mean little villages, the trails and trees and rivers and deep misted over valleys. You just don't know, she said. You hide in this little fortress behind wire and sandbags, and you don't know. Sometimes I want to eat this place, the whole country, the dirt, the death. I would just want to swallow it and have it there inside me. That's how I feel. It's like this appetite. I get scared sometimes, lots of times, but it's not bad. You know, I feel close to myself when I'm out there at night. I feel close to my own body. I can feel my blood moving, my skin, and my fingernails, everything. It's like I'm full of electricity and I'm glowing in the dark. I'm on fire almost. I'm burning away into nothing, but it doesn't matter because I know exactly who I am. You can't feel like that anywhere else. All this was said without drama, as if to herself, her voice slow and impassive. She was not trying to persuade. For a few moments she looked at Mark Fossey, who seemed to shrink away. Then she turned and moved back into the gloom. There was nothing to be done. Rat took Fossey's arm, helped him up, and led him outside. In the darkness there was that flipped-out travel music which seemed to come from the earth itself, from the deep rainforest, and a woman's voice rising up in a language beyond translation. Mark Fossey stood rigid. Do something, he whispered. I can't just let her go like that. Rat listened for a time, then shook his head. Man, you must be deaf. She's already gone. Rat Kiley stopped there, almost in mid-sentence, which drove Mitchell Sanders crazy. What next? He said. Next? The girl, what happened to her? Rat made a small, tired motion with his shoulders. Hard to tell for sure. 3-4 days later, I got orders to report her to Alpha Company. Jumped the first chopper out. That's the last I ever seen of that place. Marianne, too. Mitchell Sanders stared at him. You can't do that. Do what? It's against the rules, Sanders said. Against human nature. This elaborate story. You can't say, hey, by the way, I don't know the ending. I mean, you got certain obligations. Rat gave a quick smile. Okay, man, but up to now, everything I told you is from personal experience. The exact truth. There's a few other things I heard secondhand, third-hand, actually. From here on, it gets to be, I don't know what the word is. Speculation? Yeah, right. Rat looked off to the west, scanning the mountains, as if expecting something to appear on one of the high ridge lines. After a second, he shrugged. Anyhow, maybe 2 months later, I ran into Eddie Diamond over in Bangkok. I was on R&R, just this fluke thing, and he told me some stuff I can't vouch for with my own eyes. Even Eddie didn't really see it. He heard it from one of the greenies. So you gotta take this with a whole shaker full of salt. Once more, Rat searched the mountains, then he sat back and closed his eyes. You know, he said abruptly, I loved her. Say again? A lot. We all did, I guess. The way she looked, it made you think about those girls back home, how pure and innocent they all are. How they'll never understand any of this, not in a billion years. Try to tell them about it, they'll just stare at you with those big round candy eyes they won't understand zip, as you're trying to tell somebody what chocolate tastes like. Mitchell Sanders nodded, or shit. There it is, you gotta taste it, and that's the thing with Marianne. She was there. She was up to her eyeballs in it. After the war, man, I promise you won't find nobody like her. Suddenly, Rat pushed up to his feet, moved a few steps away from us, then stopped and stood with his back turned. He was an emotional guy. Got hooked, I guess. He said I loved her. So when I heard from Eddie about what happened, it almost made me... Like you say, it's pure speculation. Go on, Mitchell Sanders said. Finish up. What happened to her, Rat said, was what happened to all of them. You come over clean and you get dirty, and then afterward it's never the same. A question of degree. Some make it intact, some make it at all. For Marianne Bell, it seemed Vietnam had the effect of a powerful drug, that mix of untamed terror and unnamed pleasure that comes as the needle slips in and you don't know you're risking something. The endorphins start to flow and the adrenaline, and you hold your breath and creep quietly through the moonlit nightscapes. You become intimate with danger. You're in touch with the far side of yourself as though it's another hemisphere, and you want to string it out and go wherever the trip takes you and be a host to all the possibilities inside yourself. Not bad, she'd said. Vietnam made her glow in the dark. She wanted more. She wanted to penetrate deeper into the mystery of herself, and after a time she wanted... The wanting became needing, which turned to to craving. According to Eddie Diamond, who heard it from one of the greenies, she took a greedy pleasure in night patrols. She was good at it. She had the moves, all camouflaged up, her face smooth and vacant. She seemed to flow like water through the dark, like oil, without sound or center. She went barefoot. She stopped carrying a weapon. There were times, apparently, when she took crazy, death-wish chances, things that even the greenies balked at. It was as if she were taunting some wild creature out in the bush, or in her head, inviting it to show itself. A curious game of hide-and-go-seek that was played out in the dense terrain of a nightmare. She was lost inside herself. On occasion, when they were taken under fire, Marianne would stand quietly and watch the tracer rounds snap by, a little smile at her lips, intent on some private transaction with the war. Other times, she would simply vanish altogether for hours, for days, and then one morning, all alone, Marianne walked off into the mountains and did not come back. No body was ever found. No equipment, no clothing. For all she knew, Red said the girl was still alive. Maybe up in one of the high mountain villages, maybe with the Montagnard tribes, but that was guesswork. There was an inquiry, of course, and a week-long air search, and for a time the Trabon compound went crazy with MP and CID types. In the end, however, nothing came of it. It was a war, and the war went on. Mark Fossey was busted to PFC, shipped back to the hospital in the States. 2 months later, received a medical discharge. Marianne Bell joined the missing. But the story did not end there. If you believe the greenies, Red said, Marianne was still somewhere out there in the dark. Odd movements, odd shapes, late at night. When the greenies brought an ambush, the whole rainforest seemed to stare at them. A watched feeling. And a couple of times they almost saw her sliding through the shadows. Not quite, but almost. She had crossed the other side. She was part of the land. She was wearing her culottes, her pink sweater, and a necklace of human tongues. She was dangerous. She was ready for the kill.